Hi, Manuel. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Anika Meier. I'm a curator and writer. And for a couple of years, I wrote a column for a German art magazine titled Monopol. And that's how I got interested in social media art, digital art, and everything about, art and technology. And at some point, I was invited by NRW Forum to visit one of the exhibitions because they had a virtual exhibition building designed by Manuel Rossner. And that's how we met. And yeah, he very early on started, that's by now nearly 10 years ago. So Manuel is for sure one of the pioneers when it comes to virtual world building, but being interested in working with virtual reality and augmented reality. When he was a student, he started thinking about how he could curate in the virtual space, design spaces, how to present the work of other artists, and how to make exhibitions online and experience. And that's how we got started working together at König Gallery. I was invited by Johann König, the German gallerist. His gallery is housed in a former brutalist church in Berlin. And that's a very impressive building. I think it's one of the most iconic gallery spaces. And Johann and I invited Manuel to create a virtual reality piece. Then Manuel got very creative. And at some point later on, started working with the Grand Palais, with Hamburger Kunsthalle, who invited them also to create experiences online for visitors. Yes. And he's going to show us what he created over the past 10 years and what lies ahead for the future of art and technology, I guess.
Wow. Thank you so much, Anika. Maybe let's get started with the project Anika was talking about, so how we met each other.
I think it's also interesting to hear for people. I mean, you've been thinking about virtual spaces and digital material, how to curate exhibitions, and so on and so on. I mean, how did you sort of like more than 10 years ago, like these days, it's so normal that we think about the metaverse, but how did you, like more than 10 years ago, did get started thinking about all of these questions?
Maybe I will start with the very first project that I did, which was rather creating exhibitions with artists than exhibiting myself. And it was Float Gallery, which I started in 2012. So when I went to art school, I rediscovered skills from creating games, which I developed while playing shooters with my friends when I was like 15 or something. And I always was interested in how to find new ways of dealing with digital space, except for Counter-Strike maybe, which is fun, but also limited in a way. And so I started to invite different artists to create artworks specifically for digital versions of physical spaces. You can see here a piece by Kim Lawton or Manuel Fernandez, who took a column from the Acropolis on Google Earth and put it into the digital gallery space. And then Alain Bieber from NRW Forum got in touch and asked me to create a virtual reality exhibition for him and a lounge where like people can get into the virtual world. And what I came up with was this digital building, like an extension to the physical building, and you walked into a gallery space which looked like this, and then there were 5 virtual reality headsets like this one here, back then with larger computers, but you were really fully immersed in the digital world. You found yourself in the same location, like here with all the colors and stuff, but then you were able to walk into this extension building. And there were artworks by for other artists like Ahiko Taniguchi, Tabitha Reser, Theo Triantafilides, and Bunsen Bowinkel. And this is also how I met Anika, because as you said, you came to the exhibition and wrote a great article about it.
Yeah, exactly. I visited the exhibition, and I had to be, the interesting part was I had to be on location to visit an exhibition in the virtual world. And when I invited you, I think that was like 2 years later, to work with Johann König and myself on an exhibition in VR, you you started thinking about, well, the show would have been on view only for like 10 days, and you were really interested in making this virtual experience accessible for pretty much everyone who wanted to visit it. And yeah, then you started thinking about how you could solve that, and had the idea to actually create an app. And we launched this exhibition during the pandemic, but you started way before anyone knew about Corona or anything, started thinking about like how to make a VR piece and a digital exhibition like accessible for anyone. And yeah, so people could just enter the show via their smartphones. I think you have a video prepared for that.
Oh yeah, for the critic exhibition, yeah. I even have an interactive version here. Let's see how that works. So, yeah, while it's loading, I mean, what also was really interesting to me back then already is how you as a curator and as a writer really were interested in these topics, because I think today, I don't know, it feels like the whole art world is talking about digital art, but back then it was really special. And having you as a writer from Monopole in there, for me, it was really a big sign that like interest is also shifting to these worlds, because of course artists are creating in these worlds, but it's also important to have writers, and you were really early in that. It's super cool. And yeah, this is the digital version of St. Agnes, the gallery that Johann runs in the heart of Berlin, the Brutalist Church that Anika already introduced. And so what I did in early 2020 was recreating the space in this kind of gaming environment. And usually you played it on your phone. There's also a virtual reality version of it, but since everybody has a phone, you can walk through it like a jump and run game. So you can jump and experience.
And you can run.
You can run, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's also important is that you have to run. So on the one hand, what would never be possible in a physical show is that you can like throw over or destroy a sculpture like this. And I wrote a script so that it just rebuilds. So on the one hand, you can destroy it, but you also cannot destroy it because it will come back anyway.
And the interesting part is when we worked on the exhibition, right? I mean, it's sort of like a jump and run game, but then we had a lot of conversations and discussions about, well, should it actually work like a real game? Should there be levels? Should there be something people have to achieve? Are there going to be tasks? Is there something they can win in the end? And you made the decision to not have that. Do you remember why?
Yes, I mean, in the end, I think what I also find really interesting is that in the art world, that's different from gaming, because you can make very subtle decisions. I mean, in games, usually you have a weapon and you can destroy everything and you have to survive or something. But in the art world, it also already means a lot that you can throw over a sculpture, and the context is really important. And here, it's really like you have to solve these challenges, which is really a thing already in exhibitions, because usually you can walk everywhere, but in order to view this exhibition completely, you have to be kind of a gamer. And I think that's already a shift in how to view exhibitions. I mean, you can argue that it makes it harder and maybe not everybody can access it, but I think in this case, because it's part of the concept, it really makes sense. So you can only access this area if you are able to do this. And I think each like collecting things, or I don't know, winning, being fast or something, it would really shift away from the aesthetic interest that I have here. And also, yeah, in the end, I think viewing the exhibition is also the reward. Just like in every exhibition, it's not like, okay, you get a reward if you have a look at all the artworks or something. That doesn't really make sense to me. And so, I mean, I might have spoiled it now for some people because you only can access this when you walk through it. But yeah, that's kind of the reward in the end.
I think this is really interesting in the regard that when we're talking about, I don't know if you would identify your work purely as some form of digital sculpture. But when people hear this term, or when people think about if I wanted to create like a sculptural work in the virtual world, it's often associated with a physical sculpture because that's how we understand this idea of sculpture. But the whole concept and the possibility or your thinking seems to be completely different compared to when you work in a physical space. So I'm curious, what's your thinking process like when you trying to concept a sculptural work in the metaverse or virtual world, so to speak? Like, what are the things that you think about in your art?
Yeah, I mean, I can show my idea of like sculpture, maybe very tangible. So there's this painting I created for this exhibition, which I did in virtual reality. So again, I wear the virtual reality glasses, and then I just traced the movement of my hands, and they create these shapes. I put them in the form of a classic rectangle portrait in a way. Yeah, so here in the background, you can see this physical piece that I also created from this series. So my question is, what is this? What is an object in the end? And those data, they are like numbers that shape these kind of objects, and they can be stored on the blockchain. Actually, it's a series of 100 NFTs that I created here, and 25 of them can be produced physical. And I'm interested in how the information can shift between different metaverses, so you can view them in exhibitions, but also in like different spatial online platforms. But you can also make a physical object of it. And on the one hand, I think in the digital, those categories like sculpture and painting and photography kind of collapse or like get a very different notions. But I also try to find new ways to look at the traditional views. And this, I mean, it's not really a painting only, and it's not only a sculpture. So it's really hovering in between, I think.
So I think what's interesting is that in the so-called metaverse or virtual world, that the relationship between a viewer and the artwork has a very different notion. Like you mentioned, it can be a game experience, it can be more interactive, but in a way, it's immersive, of course, but the immersive, it's also different from when you are physically immersed with the actual sculpture. So do you think like gaming or gamification, it's a important part of your work in the virtual world?
I mean, Manuel, we've done the exhibition at König Gallery with your sculpture. That was a sculpture, but at the same time, it had the gamified aspect that people could climb on it.
Oh, true, yeah. This was the
online, yeah.
The Decentraland one, right?
Yeah, where it because my gaming skills were not good enough, I wasn't able to climb outside and.
We always fall down from the spiral.
Yeah, I mean, on the opening night, there were like 200 to 300 artists, and I was a curator of the exhibition together with Johann König, and I couldn't join people on the rooftop party because I didn't manage to climb up the sculptures. So there's a sculpture, but then actually it's also sort of like a video game. You have to, have the skills to, be there at a certain point.
Yeah. So in a way, I mean, that was at a time like in April 2021, right? Yeah. That was super exciting to see how you as a curator, also together with Johan as a traditional gallery owner, jumped into the metaverse, and we made it so that in the end the curator had to be as good as like the really OG net artists that we also had for the opening in order to make it to the rooftop party that we had up here. And for me, I mean, I see myself or my practice rather as a sculptor in the digital sphere. So I see the digital as a kind of a material that I'm using, and I find out about the properties and what makes sense to create in this digital realm. So, for example, if you have physical wood, you can break it or you can burn it, and you know what happens. And I'm wondering, how does this translate to the digital? So if I create a digital object, what does it imply? And I think the whole world is really based on gaming. So all the software that we're using, and also the online platforms like Decentraland, they really have much of their origin in gaming. And so I try to find out how to deal with these connections and how to create an interesting experience in the digital sphere.
I think sometimes, for example, in Decentraland, I think the players cannot fly, right? You can only walk or climb or jump. So it's interesting in a way, like in different virtual platform, they have their own limitation in terms of what it's capable. And that changed the aspect of how the viewer or participant can interact with the work as well. Because if we can fly, Anika would be able to just fly to the rooftop, and she doesn't need to climb and then unsuccessfully.
But I would still have to figure out how I'd be able to fly.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
it's true,
when it comes to virtual worlds, I think it's like, I guess we all remember the big Clubhouse hype, right? And then everyone had to understand and learn how Clubhouse works. Or now when one enters a Twitter space for the first time, they have to figure out, well, how do I get into the space? How do I accept invitations to be a speaker? How do I turn my microphone on and off? So with every new app or social media network or whatever, we have to learn how to use it. And I guess that's the same for virtual worlds. But I find it very interesting that at this point, the majority of people is more open to download a new app and to understand how a social media network, instead of clicking on a link and entering a virtual world. And I'm wondering why that is the case. Why does there still seem to be, I don't know, a certain fear of the unknown when it comes to these virtual worlds? Manu, do you have an idea why that is?
I mean, I think the idea of moving an even larger part of your life into a virtual world, it's very powerful. It might be a bit scary, a bit exciting. And what I find also interesting in the crypto space is it seems like there's another chance to build something, because I guess everyone is a bit disappointed by how like Web 2.0 is working. I mean, it's great to connect people and amazing platforms and projects happening there, but also we don't want another like Facebook Meta something taking over this space. And I think now is really the time to be creative and to be have as many participants also as possible, and participants that are aware of like distributing their time to different platforms and make it more diverse and have different voices and competitors. But at the same time, I mean, it's also more difficult because it's rather startups than something really, really well working and established. So you need to have some kind of threshold of experiment as well. And maybe that's holding people back. And I think there's really a gradient also between a very realistic digital world, which I'm very interested in, but also like more minimalistic, more reduced worlds. Because, for example, in Decentraland, you can already see that it's not like there's no real-time reflections or something like that. And the trees around the gallery, they look kind of cartoonish. But I think we can really play, as you mentioned, also with physics, with gravity. You can turn it off or turn it on as a developer, and it has different implications.
I really like the cartoonish look, I mean, of the whole Decentraland thing, but that's also what the art world struggled with when we launched the exhibition. König was the first big gallery in Decentraland, and the feedback from press back in the days was, well, that's a cartoonish look, it's like a video game, and so on and so on. And like, it was so interesting that they press and so on, or critics had an issue with taking something like Decentraland or any virtual world that's close to a game serious as an art form. And now, like 18 months later, the discussion is so heavily around metaverses and the metaverse and virtual worlds. And we basically see that the most successful ones are actually like function and look like video games. Also what Meta is building. So let's see how the art world, if the art world at a certain point will lose their fear of entering these virtual worlds.
Yeah, I think the term metaverse almost is associate negatively with something that it shouldn't be. Like, people would be arguing like metaverse is such a vague term, and it's not even specific of how it implies. And I think it all makes sense, but also in the same time, that shouldn't deter people to have a open attitude to explore the possibility within these new worlds. Because after all, it's very natural, like we are digital native as a human being, and that we are living in different forms of digital worlds, one way or another.
Definitely, yes. I find that really interesting, and also don't know if it's the right word, but maybe a bit hypocrite sometimes, because when I work with institutions or gallery, or if I look at like really established classic contemporary artists, you can see that their work is a 3D file, and they build and imagine their exhibitions in SketchUp or something and put it together. And I think like shifting into this sphere is really, really powerful on the one hand. And I also feel like, and that's what I'm playing with, because those are very small painting sculptures compared to the one at König Gallery, for example, which is taking the whole space. But I think, do we really need to produce these things and throw it away after the show is over? Or is a work valuable when it's like made of metal and super heavy? Or is also the idea and the concept as a file, which carries the same information? It's just that you don't use so much material and energy. Isn't that already something very, very valuable, and almost everything is in there already? And then from then on, you can even expand and explore the whole possibilities of the digital sphere.
I mean, the interesting part about the digital space and virtual worlds is, especially compared to social media platforms such as Instagram, as an artist, I mean, basically like everyone else who uses a social network, you have that, grid, and everything. That's one positive side, but that's also a negative side, because you can't get like really creative. So you can share, images, videos, and everything is pressed into this grid system. But when it comes to virtual worlds, like I remember working with you and later Jonas Lund on your solo shows in Decentraland, And you artists, you really try to understand what you can do in this virtual world and where the constraints are and how you can, as an artist, get creative. And then you integrate it, because you're also sort of like a 3D architect, because you've built quite a few virtual gallery spaces and also spaces for institutions, such as Hamburger Kunsthalle in Germany, Francisco Carolinum in Linz, Grand Palais in Paris, and so on and so on. So you have quite some experiences with building spaces. So you went in there and you checked what you can do and what's possible. And yes, for sure there are limitations, but as an artist within these constraints, you can build something. While when it comes to Instagram, you can basically upload a photo and a video, and that's about it. And here in Decentraland or other virtual worlds, like another artist I've worked with, Thomas Webb, he's building his own virtual world called web.game. As an artist, you can also just say, well, I don't want to use any of the existing virtual worlds. I just build my own.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that constraint shouldn't be necessarily negative for creativity.
Yeah, on the one hand, I think yes, but it's also maybe a bit of a temporal thing. I mean, I don't know about what timing we're talking here, but I think that the digital worlds, they become better and better, and then they will approach like a physical experience, at least regarding your sensual experience. If the digital space works in the same kind of way. I also made a piece about this, actually. This one is called Wetware. It's for Frankfurter Kunstverein. In 2017, I made it. And it plays with this idea with digital matter that is like this liquid, a bit like Terminator. And here I'm asking whether we first be able to experience a convincing virtual reality that we can tear from reality. So you can't tell, is this physical or is it digital, because it's just so immersive. Or whether we first are able to control chrome or metal in a way that shapes a building like this. So yeah, I think there's a bit of a competition maybe, but I think that in the end the digital will win, because you can work with every kind of attributes. You can, I don't know, disable, enable gravity, which in the physical world is probably not possible too soon.